In our previous video, it showed you how to set up the camera with some depth of field. So I just want to go over a few more things, and then later on we'll get into rendering a little bit more, which will take us a little bit back to the camera. I'm going to press O on the keyboard, and under visibility, make sure Show Cameras is on. And that's how you can always see your camera in your view. Now, of course, I only see my light right now, so I'm going to press the A key, and that'll fit it to view. I'm going to just hold the Shift key, add a little torus here, just so we have an object. A key to fit everything in, or Shift A to fit selected. All right, now everything looks pretty good in scale. But if I went ahead and I went over here to my layout, and let's say I go into skyscrapers and I load a skyscraper, look what happens. Let me go back here to model view. Okay, well, if I zoom out to see that skyscraper, I lose my camera. Well, that's simply because it's in the center of the screen. So I'll press W, get my transform, and just move it out. But look what happens. It's really tiny, okay? And sometimes that's hard to work with. So there's a little trick you can do. And if you come over here, select the camera, down here on the right is display right there. Now this used to be a little tab up here, but it's actually on the right now. Select that, and there's some variables you can set for the camera itself. And just remember, anything you select in the item list then corresponds here with properties. Well, there's a size icon. All right, so if I just click and hold on my scale right there, and I just ramp those up on the arrows, you'll see I'm scaling it up. But if you set it to 0, it becomes this infinite size in that when I zoom down, it stays relative to my screen, and if I zoom in, it stays relative to my screen. So that size of the camera always stays the same, no matter how big my objects are or how small they are. This has nothing to do with the rendering, has nothing to do with what your camera sees. It's just a visibility icon thing. So that's often a really good thing to do. Possibly even set that as default. And of course you can label the camera too. And so there's the camera. And I type that in, and if I offset that like this, let's see how big my screen is. Okay, so there's a little trick. So I've got 5 meters down here. That means every square is 5 meters in length. So I want this out about 20 meters. And so there's my camera. So a little label, not really a big deal when it's one camera, but when you have multiple cameras in a scene and you want to know which is which, that's a really good thing to do. You can also add draw options and set up for different colors when selected, when it's not selected. Lots of great little tools for the camera that I know a lot of people don't really do unless they're getting into some rigging. But you can show safe areas, level bars, all kinds of great things. So just a few more things to play around with the camera. Let's go back up to the camera settings, some of the more important things. We talked about depth of field. There's also motion blur you can enable. And the way that's going to work very simply is you turn it on, and when you render, you'll actually see some blur. Now, if I had set some keyframes for this across the screen, and let's just actually turn that off. Let's work with our torus. We'll get over here to our render. Let's open this up so we can see everything. Okay. Select the camera again. Camera effects. Okay, so there's my motion blur. Let's put this on, and let's bring that to view. And we've not talked about animation yet, but we will. All right, and I'm just going to do a quick little animation here. So we're going to go 12 here. We're going to go 0 here. So that means at about frame 6, it's in front of the camera. Okay, so with that moving fast across the screen, I'm not seeing anything now. But when I render, the motion blur kicks in. And the default motion blur in 901 is actually looking very good. If you have something moving slow, you're not going to see a lot of blur. It's going to work like the real world. The faster it's moving, the more it's going to blur. I like to put a little bit of motion blur, even on things like logos and things like that, because it just adds a little bit more realism. All right, so again, camera effects, motion blur, and you can play with the blur length. You can do a little more, a little less. The shutter speed for how fast that is working. So let's go up to 240. And we're going to see a shorter blur, but a cleaner blur by doing what we just did. Okay, so that's a little more realistic. All right, so just a little motion blur. And then we can put on stereoscopic, which is also fun. Depending on if you render in stereoscopic glasses, it renders left and right. So you can see there was actually 2 renders there. And finally, there's clipping planes, which you can set, and a clipping distance. So as we're working, you can actually see that camera clip away. So kind of a neat little trick. Instead of a render boolean, just a way you can actually clip away the camera. Don't think a lot of people use that too often. The last thing I want to show you that you can do, if needed, and certain scenes might actually have that. And let me load up a scene I was working on today for a different project. Give you a really good example of where this would come in handy. This is a project I'm actually working on for a client, and in this we're going to have an outside view, an exterior view, and then an interior view. So up here in the top right corner, there's a little kind of tick mark in those views there. And when I move my mouse, you see that whole interface highlight. Well, if I hold my control key and swipe to the right, I actually duplicate that frame. What I've been doing as a test for lighting is I have my exterior camera, and you can actually see if I got my camera here, right? Okay. And let's get rid of this old scene so you know which one I'm working on. Okay, so here is the exterior camera, and I'll rename it. Then I'm going to go to Add Items, make a new camera, and this will be interior camera. And that will show up here. And then let's just get this all in view. And then this is what my interior camera will see once I get it in place. And then I'll just pan down just a little bit like that and let that refresh. So now I can actually see my interior as well as my exterior as I'm updating my lighting. And I can, of course, render each of these views as well. So don't think that you only have to have one camera. You have as many cameras as you want. And it's kind of nice to have them fixed and have them set so you don't have to take the main camera and move it around. And, of course, I've got 2 render windows open. So just a few things about the camera that will help you. The last thing I want to talk about down here, which we're going to do during rendering, is the film back and the resolution and things like that when we come down here to projection and the film back. We're going to talk about that as we get to rendering when we get to our outputs. So we've gotten all the basics down. Let's go ahead and move on to something a little more intricate and get into tension texture with Moto 901.